For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation. I think most football fans would tell you that the most exciting play in the sport is a punt return taken to the house for a touchdown. The special teams unit plays a critical part in the outcome of a game, and can single-handedly decide whether you win or lose games. Heck, the 2010 San Diego Chargers know all about that. And a huge punt return to completely flip the field and get momentum on your side? Yeah, that is super exciting and is remembered for a long period of time. Think about it. The other team is punting the ball at their own 40 or near midfield. So while you're happy that your defense got a stop and got off the field without allowing any points, you're nervous they're going to be pinned deep in your own territory, completely backed up, and losing the field position battle. The next thing you know, thanks to a bad punt, great blocking, bad tackling, or a combination of a whole bunch of factors, you're taking this punt inside your own 10-yard line to the house for a score and getting a touchdown off of absolutely nothing. It is a rare play. Heck, we have played 58 Super Bowls, and while we've had a few close calls, we've never actually had a punt return for a touchdown in the big game. But when it does happen at any level, it is fun. You're watching some of these great punt returns over the years that happened in that 90-plus yard range that were electric at the time, and are still electric all these years later, and for good reason. Assuming it doesn't happen against your team, as a football fan, watching a great punt return is super cool. Speaking of watching things that are super cool, if you think that NFL history is super cool, then be sure to hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. We post every single day about something weird and wacky in the history of the NFL, like today's story. And we're so close to 60,000 subscribers, so help us on the road to reach that milestone. Thanks in advance for your support. But of all the punt returns in NFL history, and of all the times that a punt was taken to the house for a touchdown, who holds the record for the longest one? Well, back in 1974, it was a man who had no idea he held it at the time due to a statistical error by the NFL. This man right here is Dennis Morgan, and you're seeing some of his kick returns for the Dallas Cowboys, showing some of his value on special teams in that regard. But in 1974, the man scored the first and only touchdown of his entire career, and thanks to his statistical error, he had no idea at the time that he just set the NFL record for the longest punt return touchdown in NFL history. It seems insane today. Imagine a running back not knowing until well after the fact that he set the record for most rushing yards because the statistician counted wrong, or a quarterback not knowing until well after the fact that he set the record for most passing yards because the statistician made a big error. But in 1974, that's exactly what happened, and we're going to take a deep dive into that today. Because half a century later, this is the story of Dennis Morgan, as in, the member of the Dallas Cowboys who set the record for the longest punt return touchdown in NFL history, and had no idea that he did it. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, and the punt return that was the record without anyone knowing it, we need some context to understand the game at hand, its importance, how the game was going, and perhaps most importantly in all of this, just who the record breaker was. It's October 13th, 1974. It's week 5 of the NFL season, and we've got a big game on our hands in the NFC East between the Dallas Cowboys and the St. Louis Cardinals over at Busch Stadium. For the Cowboys, as in the main team in our story, to say that this game is absolutely massive for them would be putting it lightly, as against all odds, the most formidable team in the NFC over the last decade finds themselves in grave danger. Dallas had made the playoffs every year since 1966, and had won their division every year but one in that stretch. This was a team that had made it to each of the last 4 conference championships. And yet, somehow, after dropping 3 straight games, they find themselves at 1-3, 3 games back of the St. Louis Cardinals for the division lead, and 2 games back of the lone wildcard spot in the conference. Lose this game and fall to 1-4, and you basically need to run the table to have any shot at making the playoffs and avoid missing out for the first time since 1965, as in before the Super Bowl era. Win this game, and you can find yourself right back in the thick of things. But if you lose this one, especially in a 14-game season, your season might be over way earlier than anyone expected. As for how this game went, as you've been able to tell from the highlights, it did not go well for the Cowboys at all, as by the time the clock hit triple zeros, the Cardinals had emerged victorious, taking it 31-28. St. Louis actually led at 28-14 entering the fourth quarter, and Dallas made a valiant effort to come back and tie the game at 28 apiece. However, these were the Don Coryell Cardinals, who had a propensity to win games late, and thanks to a 31-yard field goal with 1:02 left in the contest, the Cards improved to 5-0, putting a dent in Dallas' season. It was a super evenly matched game. The Cardinals had 374 yards of total offense, compared to 370 for the Cowboys, and the game felt like an extremely back-and-forth affair most of the way. But at the end of the day, this was another close and heartbreaking loss for the Cowboys in what was shaping up to be somewhat of a heartbreaking and unexpected season for them. As a side note, to learn about another one of these losses, a Monday Night Football loss to the Philadelphia Eagles, click the card in the upper right corner. However, there was one bright spot for the Cowboys on this day, even despite the loss, that we need to talk about, and that is this man right here. This is Dennis Morgan, as in the Cowboys' 10th round pick out of Western Illinois. Morgan originally started off as a defensive back, but the Cowboys switched him over to running back due to the depth they had at that position and due to how fast he was. At rookie orientation, Morgan had the fastest 40 time, running a 4.6. Morgan made it onto the team, but he never carried the football. You never saw him on offense. Instead, he made it due to how well he played on special teams, as he was an explosive and dynamic kick returner. During that 1974 season, Morgan had 823 kick return yards, which was the fourth most in the NFL, and was the second most in a single season at the time in franchise history, only behind Mel Renfro's 1964 season. As a side note, to learn more about Renfro and how the Cowboys drafted him in the first place, click the card in the upper right corner. In fact, Morgan was so solid at returning the football that he finished the season with over 1,100 all-purpose yards, which is obviously not too shabby for a 10th round pick. But through the first 4 games of the season, this man right here had been exclusively limited to kick returns. The Cowboys had Cliff Harris to return the punts for them, and while Morgan was doing a good job returning kickoffs, averaging 21.6 yards per return over those 4 games, with his average climbing on a week-to-week basis, he hadn't been asked to return a punt yet. Then, for whatever reason that I'm not quite sure of, seeing as Cliff Harris played in the game against the Cardinals and returned some punts, Tom Landry sent Dennis Morgan back there to field a punt. Maybe Harris just needed a breather, seeing as he played defense. Keep a few things in mind here. Number 1, there were doubts about whether Morgan was even going to be able to play in this game or not, seeing as he was dealing with a hand injury and was listed on the injury report with such. Number 2, this man had never returned a punt before in the NFL in his life. This was quite literally his first time returning a punt, so he didn't necessarily know the rules of what you are supposed to do and what you are not supposed to do back there. Mainly, you don't touch a punt at your own 2-yard line, because that would be really stupid. You're likely sacrificing a ton of field position, and the risk-reward is not in your favor in the slightest bit. But 5 minutes into the contest, after Hal Roberts punted it off and Dennis Morgan decided to field it at his own 3-yard line, Morgan was off to the races, as you can tell. Morgan, defying all the conventional rules of punt returning, just took a punt 97 yards to the house for a touchdown to start the Cowboys off on the right foot and give them an early 7-0 lead. His first ever punt return, and it finds the end zone for 6 points. Absolutely unbelievable stuff right there. Just like that, Morgan had set the Cowboys franchise record for the longest punt return ever, as 97 yards was the team record in its decade-and-a-half long history by this point. The previous record was held by Bob Hayes, the future Hall of Famer who took a punt 90 yards to the house in a 1968 game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And this 97-yard punt return touchdown is a record that still stands to this day in Cowboy history. What a way to make your mark and etch your name in the history books. And everyone knew it. Even Morgan, from all accounts, knew that this was the franchise record. And all of the newspapers, as you can see with just this one example, cited this as a 97-yard return. Heck, the NFL's own official film cited this as a 97-yard return. But the NFL record? This is where it gets extremely unfortunate, because Morgan's punt return was 1 yard off the record. That's it. Just one measly yard off the NFL record of 98 yards, which had been held by two people. One of them was Gil Lefebvre, who had a 98-yard punt return for a touchdown in a 1933 game between the Cincinnati Reds and the Brooklyn Dodgers. Yes, those were two football teams back then, and no, unsurprisingly, there was no footage of this play available. However, the other one was this one right here, as in a 98-yard return by Minnesota return man Charlie West in a game against Washington. As you can tell on this punt, even though West fielded the ball initially at the 4-yard line, because his momentum carried him to the 2 before he could start going forward, it counted as a 98-yard return. And this was properly scored. Per the NFL Guide to Statisticians, the distance of a punt return shall be measured from the point at which the impetus of the punt ends, and the receiver is able to initiate forward progress, using the back foot as a starting point. And if we look at example 5, that's exactly what we see when it says, a player takes a punt on his own 30, but retreats 3 yards to the 27 because the impetus of the punt requires him to move backward. He then advances to the 30. The punt is recorded to the 27, and the punt return is measured at 3 yards. If you run back on your own accord, that doesn't count. But if your momentum carries you backward, as was the case on that Charlie West touchdown that went 98 yards, then the yardage counts. It's almost like an interception return. And that takes us back to the Dennis Morgan punt return touchdown 6 years later in that 1974 game against the St. Louis Cardinals. Because now, we're going to take a look at where Morgan's back foot was when he fielded this ball and was able to go forward without being carried by his momentum. And sure enough, if we pause it right here, his back foot is not on the 3-yard line. Instead, his back foot is on the 2-yard line. This wasn't a 97-yard punt return touchdown. This play was scored incorrectly. This should have been ruled as a 98-yard punt return touchdown. Not only was this the Dallas Cowboys franchise record, that was never in doubt, but this was the NFL record for the longest punt return touchdown. The NFL had been around for more than half a century at this point, and little did anyone know at the time, due to a scoring error, that Dennis Morgan's first ever punt return was the record-tying score. And in the days after the game, the NFL reviewed the tapes on this play right here, and they realized, oh crap, we made a mistake. Because despite the punt initially being ruled as a 97-yard punt return for a touchdown, the NFL reversed course, and upon further review, decided to call it a 98-yard touchdown. Gil Lefebvre and Charlie West had some company now at the top, because Morgan was joining them in the exclusive 98-yard punt return touchdown club. And this is not the first time I've done a video about the NFL screwing up a stat in a game involving the St. Louis Cardinals, because a similar thing happened to Cardinals wide receiver Bobby Joe Conrad, where he set a record that no one knew about at the time due to a statistician error. If you want to learn more about that, click the card in the upper right corner. But after the review, Dennis Morgan didn't just make Cowboys franchise history. He made NFL history as well.
A sparkling 97-yard return as Dallas detonated a bomb of its own.
As for what happened afterwards for the man who played for this team behind me right here, unfortunately, despite a very solid 1974 season on special teams, even though the Cowboys missed the playoffs, Morgan was cut before the start of the 1975 season. He would sign with the Philadelphia Eagles later in the year, but in 1975, midway through the season, he was cut by Philly, and he would never play professional football ever again after that point. that one touchdown that Morgan had, that was quite literally the only touchdown that Morgan ever scored in his entire career. That punt return touchdown was it. Now, he's not the most famous player in Cowboys history to only score one career touchdown. That award has to go to Percy Howard, who had one career reception and that happened to go for a touchdown at Super Bowl X. But Dennis Morgan, considering the circumstances, probably has to be number 2. Either way, not a bad way to enter the one touchdown club. Today, this man right here, Dennis Morgan, ranks tied for 4th in NFL history when it comes to the longest punt return touchdowns ever. Tavon Austin in 2013 for the Rams, Demaryius Johnson in 2012 for the Eagles, and Terrence Mathis in 1990 for the Jets got to 98 yards as well. But 3 men eclipsed that mark, with Patrick Peterson having a 99-yard return in 2011 for the Arizona Cardinals, Dwayne Harris having a 99-yard return in 2018 for the Oakland Raiders, and in a record that might never be broken because of how bizarre it would be, Robert Bailey having a 103-yard return in 1994 for the Los Angeles Rams. Yes, he picked up the ball in his own end zone. But even though the NFL record has since been eclipsed, Morgan's legacy will not be forgotten. Regardless, to score a touchdown on your first ever punt return is nuts. To come 1 yard off the NFL record is even crazier. And then, for that to be reversed, and rightfully so, once the NFL review the tapes and realize that you actually set the record, even without anyone knowing it at the time, that is one of the craziest punt return touchdowns of all time. Because in 1974, this man right here, Dennis Morgan, etched his name in NFL history after Morgan got 1 more yard. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.